Okay, this is Chapter 5. This is a video lecture on law enforcement contact with Asian Pacific Americans. Some learning objectives for this chapter: describe the historical background of the Asian Pacific community in the United States, highlight some of the demographic features of the population, discuss the implications of the group identification terms for Asian Pacific Americans, identify the myths and stereotypes applied to this group, identify selected characteristics of traditional and extended families, discuss certain communication styles used by Asian Pacific Americans, and highlight some law enforcement concerns and some resources and practices for addressing those concerns. A little bit of an overview. For the past 4 decades, the largest increase in any ethnic minority group in the United States has been Asian Pacific Americans. 76% growth for the past decade, basically 1990 to 2000, decade before this one. And growths have been in major cities. Most of the Asian Pacific American population has gone to the major cities: New York, Los Angeles. It's kind of a contradiction, the two terms, because they're not the same. We put the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the same group just because they're in the same general geographic area. However, there's really distinct characteristics about the two. And we'll talk about some derogatory terms in a few minutes, but Oriental is considered a derogatory term. Me being the not so bright person I was talking with an Asian good friend of mine, lieutenant with the Highway Patrol, and I used the term Oriental, and he turned and looked at me and he goes, "What'd you say, cracker?" So I thought that was kind of funny. Anyway, the point was made. That's not an appropriate term for the Asian Pacific Americans. It refers to over 40 different ethnic and cultural groups. On the next slide will show it, but I'm not going to describe them all. Look in the book, you can see who it applies to. Now there's certain groups. There's refugees. Those are people that came to the United States because they were trying to get away from somebody. Either, most of the time, it was government oppression. Those groups were sponsored by the United States government. The largest population came from Southeast Asia, being Vietnam, Cambodia, and that area in there. And they're entitled to public services, and they get program support from the United States government. That's kind of important. We'll talk about that later on. I have some neighbors of mine that came across from Vietnam right when the Vietnam War ended. They came across as refugees to the United States, joined the United States Army, became doctors. They're very, very well-to-do, have a very nice house up here in Granite Bay. And there's the immigrants. Those are people that came sometimes from sponsors from other family members that were here already. A lot of times they'll have financial support already in place before they get here. In order to get residency status, they have to show that they can be self-sufficient. And they don't usually get a lot of the public programs, not welfare and other things like that. Now, let's talk about the historical immigration from Asia to the United States, the Asian areas. In the 1850s, I'm sorry about the mistake on the slide here, I thought I corrected it. In the 1850s, there shouldn't be a possessive apostrophe on that. The Chinese came to California gold mines basically as laborers. Mostly it was Chinese, and then followed by the Japanese, Filipinos, Koreans. And they worked as laborers and other, the low-level jobs. In the 1850s, the Americans became resentful for the Chinese because they were willing to do work that other people weren't. Now, that may sound a little familiar today about people picking agricultural goods in the fields. That's the work that most United States citizens won't do, but people that immigrate from usually the south border now are willing to do that kind of work. Well, that was done by the Asians back in that time. They did stuff like they built the railroads here in California, built a lot of the levees that feed our water project in California. A lot of the good things that were done by the Chinese laborers during that time. They passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, banned immigrants for 10 years, and for a long time the Chinese population at least declined in the United States from the 1880s to the 1920s. During that time, the majority of the Asian Pacific Americans came across to Angel Island, which is in the San Francisco Bay. If you ever get a chance, go to Angel Island. They've got a center there dedicated to the immigration of Asian Pacific Americans. They're now Americans, Asian Pacific people that came across, wanted to be United States citizens, and they all came through Angel Island. You may be familiar with Ellis Island on the East Coast. That's where a lot of the European, maybe relatives of yours, relatives of mine, came through. Or if you're Asian Pacific, that area there, a lot of your relatives may have came across through Angel Island. They loosened the restrictions and they allowed family members to come across in the early 1900s, and the Japanese American population increased substantially. You know, it says on the slide there, 25,000 to 127,000 by 1940. The Immigration Act, if you think about the early part of the United States, we encouraged immigration. We wanted to build the population up, and then, you know, all of a sudden we started getting too many people. So they said, no, let's limit the amount of immigration that can come in. So one of the first groups to be banned were the Asians. And then they actually started doing things like offering people one-way tickets back to the Philippines, other things like that. Very oppressive to the people from that area. Skip that slide. Oh, I'm sorry, not this slide here. There actually used to be a law that prohibited blacks, mulattoes, or Indians from testifying in favor of or against whites in court. Imagine that. You were prohibited from testifying mainly because of your ethnic background. And then we went to war, World War II in 1942. Maybe your grandparents may have talked about this, but the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and all of a sudden we took over 100,000 Japanese Americans. These were people that were American citizens, and many of them were born here in the United States. American citizens. Some of them were immigrants, some of them were here, but a lot of them were born in the United States, and we put them in a thing called internment camps. It was basically a prison camp because we were afraid that all the Japanese were spies. I'm saying we, it wasn't me, I wasn't there, but the American government at the time thought that all of the Japanese were spies, and they put them in internment camps. If you get a chance, you know, look at some specials on internment camps, and that might even be your topic for your term paper. You know, think about the internment camps, especially if you're Japanese descent. That might be something you might want to look at. These were people that were not convicted of a crime. They weren't given any kind of due process. The United States government didn't have to prove that they were a spy. They were just thrown in the internment camps and kept there until the end of the war. Eventually, we, as the United States, we agreed that was a wrong thing to do, and they paid what's called reparations. They paid money to the families, to the people that they did that to, but still, they were taken away from everything and put in these camps in the desert. You can still see the camps. They're all worn down now, but they're down in the desert, down in San Bernardino. You can actually go visit them still. Population-wise, it's about 5% of the population in the United States, 15.2 million people. Now, they broke down the different categories in the book. They talk about different categories of Pacific Islander Asian refugees. They talk about people that were here less than 5 years, greater than 5 years, second generation. They talk about their different experiences. Take a look at that chapter in the book, that section in the book, and it talks about their different experiences. Some have a lot of influence of being quote-unquote Americanized. Some of them have very little influence being Americanized. Some labels and terms. Oriental, like I said before, is considered to be offensive. Maybe you've heard other offensive terms like a gook and chink and stuff like that. All very derogatory terms, similar to the N-word for black people. You'll hear that said among your peers sometimes. Very derogatory is probably something you should avoid and then discourage. And in one of the discussion questions, somebody said I didn't want to take a stand. Sometimes you do have to take a stand to do the right thing. Sometimes you got to butt into other people's business, especially if you're thinking about getting into be uniformed law enforcement. Then you really have to butt into other people's business and tell them what's right and what's wrong. Maybe you've heard the term the model minority. Asians, especially Asians from China, Taiwan, Japan, that area in there, are considered to be the model minority because there's a stereotype that Asians are really good at math and they're really smart and they are very successful, and it is just a stereotype. Now, there are a huge amount of Asians that are successful. There's a huge amount of other races that are successful too, but for some reason this model minority or the super minority myth is gone. Now, Asian also includes other parts of Asia, such as India. And we don't talk a lot about the Indians, but they're considered to be the Asian population. And there's different religions in India. We'll talk about them towards the end here, that you might have misunderstandings about their cultural practices. One thing, Asian Americans, very strong family ties. 3 to 4 generations in the same house in some areas. I live in the Bay Area. I lived in the Bay Area for a long time, San Francisco, and it's not uncommon to see 3 or 4 generations, grandma, grandpa, great-grandma, sons, daughters, all in the same thing. They tend, a lot of times the populations tend to stay in their own little enclaves, they call them. You've maybe heard of Chinatown, Koreatown. If you've been to Los Angeles, you've got Chinatown, you've got Koreatown. In Orange County, you've got a lot of Southeast Asians, and so you've got the little Cambodia and other areas down there. The father, for the most part, is the head of the household, and we'll talk about that towards the end, but when you contact the family, it's almost disrespectful to go talk to the children first, or to go talk to the mother first, or the grandma. You want to talk to the father first. In most cases. Now, again, these are all generalizations. It depends on, again, how far Americanized the household is, but still, you're almost better off talking to the father first if you go on scene of a crime. Most of the time, husband and wife both work out of the home. Huge amount of self-employed. They own shops, they own businesses, computer software businesses, accountants, attorneys, stuff like that. But self-employed, you see a huge amount of that in the Asian Pacific population. Children care for each other. You'll find that often. I've been on several calls where the teenage children are looking after the younger children. Latchkey, that's where the children come home without a parent home. I've often used the children as translators because the children are going to school, so they're learning English, and sometimes you'll need them for translators. But again, you don't contact the kid first and say, tell your dad to do this. You contact the dad first, and then, in limited English that dad may or may not speak, ask if it's okay if the child translates, or maybe he'll let him turn to the child to translate. Family violence is highly underreported in the Asian community. Why is that? Because it's shameful. It's the same thing in most other communities also. For those of you who had AJ100 with me, we talked a little bit about domestic violence, but it's one of the most underreported crimes because of the fact that it's shameful. This is their breadwinner, and if they turn the breadwinner in, what happens to them? They might go hungry. So why are they going to report the crime? A lot of times that Asian Pacific American women have been physically assaulted. They didn't know that there's resources outside of the house for them. A lot of them won't even reach out to the resources. I'll put up with it just because of the fact that it's better than what they had before. It's a very sad state of things, but that's just the way it is. You need to slow down with the population. And we're talking about different populations throughout the course here, but for this population, along with others, you need to slow down. Officers tend to get in a hurry a lot because you get a lot of calls backed up. You might have 6 or 7 calls backed up, so when you get to a scene of a crime or something, you want to get the information you can as fast as possible. A burglary call, something like that. You need to slow down sometimes. Take your time. Talk with people. Again, they have strong family values, and they won't say no to you, and that comes into play on things like consent searches. For those of you who had AJ100 already, hopefully you've had that before taking this course, but if you haven't, a consent search basically means that you ask them if it's okay to search their vehicle. Now, people they have the right to refuse consent, but it may be loss of face to say no to authorities. So they may say yes when they don't really want you to search their car. I'm not a big fan of consent searches myself. They're a good tool, but I'm not a huge fan of them. My personal belief. Nonverbal styles. Again, they may look away from you because eye contact and sometimes is not appropriate in their culture, and so when you demand somebody look at you, that might be disrespectful. Emotions might not come out as expected. I've seen people laugh it's more of a nervous laugh than a laugh of being humor or being ridiculing you. So again, assume that you're not understanding what's going on. You need to do outreach to your communities. One of the best ways to do it, and we talked about this a couple of chapters ago, is recruiting from the populations that serve your jurisdiction. So in other words, if you're in Orange County, wouldn't it be a good idea to recruit a whole lot from the Southeast Asian communities? Yeah, they do. They do that. Putting storefront police departments and what they call them substations in storefronts. In other words, in the neighborhoods, so that they don't have to come down to the station. They can just go down there and talk to you. What was I going to talk about? Community policing. Using community policing models. We'll talk about that later on in the course here. But community policing means reaching out to the community and finding out what their needs are and what their expectations are, and building the relationships before they need police services. If you get to know your community before they need your services, you're going to have a lot better communication with them. A lot of agencies pay bilingual pay. CHP, where I used to work for, has bilingual pay. It's about 5%, which can add up over the years. For speaking Spanish, Vietnamese, a ton of Russian, a ton of different languages. Basically, it's a foreign language. It's likely to get bilingual pay for it. Sometimes you'll have difficulty getting cooperation. They don't trust the police. In some Southeast Asian countries especially, law enforcement is very oppressive. If they see the police, they think that, if somebody gets taken away in a police car in Southeast Asia and some of those countries, they never come back. You never see them again. And so they may have that fear if you take them into custody for, say, a DUI or a theft or something like that. The family might have the expectation they're never coming back. So you need to reassure them that's not happening in this United States. Human trafficking, huge, huge, huge. I remember I made a stop up on the Grapevine once, just out the North Los Angeles County, heading up out of Magic Mountain there, on a guy. Actually, the guy ran out of gas. He ran out of gas on the side of the road. Pulled in behind to help him. One of my other officers did too. He just got this really kind of a suspicious feeling about the guy. Who was acting odd. He was giving weird stories and said he was going to Orange County, but here he was up on the Grapevine, so he was lost. And all of a sudden we heard movement in the back of the car. It was an old, like 1970s style station wagon, and it had these panels in the back, and there was two very small Asian guys. They were shoved inside these panels with the panels put back in place. They were being smuggled. I felt very, very sorry for them. We did our best to take care of them. We fed them and everything like that, and let them go turn themselves in later on. I'll leave it at that. Alright, this is a picture of my high school sweetheart. I don't know if you could tell in there, but she's Chinese. We dated throughout high school. Nice gal. This is our picture actually 30 years after we graduated. I ran into her high school reunion. Great lady. But I can tell you that I had a lot of experience with the Asian population, dating her for so long. And it's the first time that I ever really encountered prejudice. I know every single derogatory term for a white boy in Cantonese, which was her background. Bakui. Or Fei Bakui, which means a bad white boy. It's like the N-word for white boys. But anyways, I have a little bit of experience with the Asian Pacific population. My daughter actually dates a Japanese gentleman, and so I have a little bit of experience. Not saying I know everything about Asian Americans, but I know I have a little bit of closer experience than a lot of people do. Anyway, that's a lecture. Go on to read the book if you haven't done that already, and then there's some assessments and some a discussion question. Take care.